Good evening, everybody. I hope you're all doing well this Boxing Day evening, and I hope you all had a lovely Christmas break or Christmas. Here I am again. It's time for me to reread the final chapters by popular demand of this book, Nobody's Girl by Virginia Roberts Guiffre. I like to use her full name because I know Roberts is her family name. Guiffre was her married name. So yeah, in case you don't know, I've already read the end of the book live and I accidentally deleted the episode, which was 3 hours long. So I've had a few people asking, am I gonna do it? And I'm like, okay, let me reread it. I'm not sure if I'm going to do it all tonight. We'll see how it goes. But we're on chapter 33. So if you haven't already, go and watch the other 8 episodes. I've read the book and I've given a little bit of commentary here and there. I think we found out a lot of interesting context from Virginia, obviously regarding Jeffrey Epstein, what he was getting up to, the people he was mingling with and introducing her to, and allowing her to be trafficking her to them and allowing them to do stuff to her and the things he did to her. We also heard a lot about her abusive childhood growing up. And I had a comment from someone who said, in fact, I've had a few weird comments, and for the most part, I don't let it get to me, but I still think it's worth addressing. Because I do not understand why people feel the necessity to comment on the fact that I smile, for example, because I'm a smiling person and I'm a happy person. And that doesn't mean that the contents of this book makes me feel happy. It doesn't mean that I do not respect Virginia Giuffre, as I have mentioned many times over the reading of this book. I have told people to go out and buy this book and to support her, which I believe the money will go to her foundation or her trust. So yeah, I will never stop smiling. Thank you very much. Also, there was another comment regarding the fact that I did not read out the graphic detail of some of the incidents that happened to her as a child. I can't remember the exact wording, but there are very good reasons why I didn't read that bit. Mainly due to the fact that I'm using a social network platform, a tech platform owned by Google, owned by one of the most powerful organizations in the world right now, who do not allow certain words to be used. They have AI technology which monitors word usage and flags that content. So I would rather not put myself into that category, or at least try to not beat the system, but at least allow myself the best opportunity to carry on using the very small platform that I have built up, the very small community. I've also had a lot of very complimentary comments about people saying that me reading this book to them has kind of helped them to not feel so triggered. And that was really my purpose with reading the book, not just for those people, but for myself. So to be clear, I fully support Virginia Giuffre in writing this book. And I fully understand that people who've been through trauma in their own lives find these kind of testimonies difficult. And that's why I've added my commentary, because together we are unpacking it and letting it sit, because it is very important information. So that's that. That's all I've got to say on that tonight. I've also had people say, I wish she would just read the book and not give her commentary. Well, to those people, I say there are audiobooks available. I suggest you go and purchase and download. Okay, let's carry on. Chapter 33, Unbroken. After the 60 Minutes Australia report, Prince Andrew couldn't help but know I was considering filing a lawsuit against him. David Boys had made clear to Tara Brown. 60 Minutes, by the way, are one of the media platforms who will have if you use any of their content, they'll give you an automatic copyright claim on your video, which means it's not just being demonetized, it blocks the video from being shown in certain countries or territories. Why am I going to sit here and read this book for 2 hours, 3 hours, however long it is, for YouTube to automatically block it from being shown to anyone? That's what I'm talking about when I say about censorship. It does not in any shape or form mean I support people that abuse children. Let's be absolutely clear. I try to share and make sense of a lot of the information that I have been coming to terms with over the last few years. But it's a hard job when we have these copyright systems in place, even though it's very, very clear that what I am doing here is analysis and commentary. Okay, I feel like I've got a lot to get off my chest tonight. I didn't know I was going to say all of this. Right. Prince Andrew, he's not called Prince Andrew anymore. Formerly Prince Andrew couldn't help but know that I was considering filing a lawsuit against him. David Boys had made clear to Tara Brown, that's the presenter of 60 Minutes Australia, that the Duke of York's repeated denials of my allegations had put him in our crosshairs. Prince Andrew says he was unaware of the trafficking, a skeptical-looking Boys had said. But he spent days in Epstein's New York mansion, where the trafficking was rampant. You could not spend time there and not know what was going on. At some point, he's going to have to testify. He can't hide forever. So, another thing that has been released since I last read this book is another photo of Prince Andrew from the Epstein files. I should say another previously unreleased photo of Prince Andrew in a compromising situation. I've also done some other commentary on Michael Jackson and his appearance in the Epstein files and why I believe Michael Jackson is fully part of this network. But let me not get too distracted. I'm sorry. I just want people to go and watch my other videos. Not gonna lie. He spent days in Epstein's New York mansion, where the sex trafficking was rampant. You could not spend time there and not know what was going on. At some point, he's going to have to testify. He can't hide forever. When Brown said to Boys that perhaps the prince could hide, given that British law enforcement had ended its investigation into the case, Boys clarified, if he wants to stay locked up in a palace and not travel outside the United Kingdom, maybe he can escape a reckoning. But if he comes to the United States, he can be served with a subpoena. I think that's quite likely. The other thing that I've been noticing more and more is how much the British police have covered up paedophilia for years, and specifically by people within the media and within the royal family. So I think I'm going to make another video about that subject at some point. Now, with pressure building on a variety of fronts, Prince Andrew sat down with BBC Newsnight's Emily Maitlis to try to clear his name. The interview took place on November 14th, and afterward, the Prince reportedly thought it had gone well. But when it aired 2 days later, it was widely viewed as a disaster. It was literally a disaster. Everyone in the UK, he was a laughingstock, a disgrace. Not one person bought him, not one, but well, unless they were like a devout royalist, of which there are a few about. But the majority of people thought he lied for his teeth. It was a disastrous interview, and nonce was trending on Twitter because of that interview the next day or that night. The Prince expressed no regret about his long-standing relationship with Epstein. He explained being a house guest of Epstein, a convicted ex-offender, in 2010, by saying he had only visited to tell Epstein in person that their relationship was over, while insisting that his only mistake was his tendency to be honourable, to be too honourable. He failed to communicate any sympathy for Epstein's victims. True. Regarding my allegations about him, he denied them again, saying that on the night I said I'd first been trafficked to him, he couldn't have been with me because he had taken one of his daughters out for pizza. He said he had no recollection of ever meeting me, none whatsoever. Famously, to Pizza Express in Woking, which again became kind of notorious within British culture from that very interview, because many people went over to the Pizza Express in Woking trust review section and started writing some very unflattering reviews about it. But yeah, and also it doesn't make any sense that he can say that he took his children out for a pizza, because how does that stop you going to a nightclub later on in the evening? Second of all, what you're actually doing is you're showing that members of the police that were doing your security, your driver, they all knew about it as well. Or if they knew that you were innocent, they would have to testify as witnesses. More outlandishly, he said he couldn't have danced sweatily with me at the Tramp nightclub, as I described, because he temporarily developed an inability to perspire after enduring what I would describe as an overdose of adrenaline in the Falklands War when I was shot at. A bizarre reference to his military service 19 years prior to our meeting. Well, I think I said in the last episode that I made about this that is a deliberate technique, strategy to appeal to the British public that feel like people that fight in wars are heroes, that they're defending our country, and to portray himself, make himself come across as somewhat of a hero and a war hero and a veteran. And I think that's obviously why he mentioned it in the interview. And learning more about Epstein as I have been, this is something that he clearly was aware of himself, and most of the people around him in his circle that we see pictures of him with used against the public to distract from their crimes and to try and keep their image in the public positive rather than negative. I think they all very much knew what they were doing in that respect. The interview's ramifications would be sweeping. Indeed, documents made public in a court case in 2023 would reveal that Prince Andrew had lied in the interview when he told Mateless he'd only seen Epstein a single time in December 2010, after Epstein was arrested and jailed. According to court papers from a civil case brought by the US Virgin Islands against JP Morgan Chase, the prince had also had lunch with Epstein in June 2010. So that was 6 months before the December sighting, while Epstein was on house arrest and the two had kept in touch via email. Well, we've also seen copies of those emails in the latest batch of emails that was released a couple of months ago. Not just from him, as late as 2018, I believe, or pretty much when the interview that she's talking about here happened. I think it was 2019. Yeah, they were still in contact, talking about doing some deal with Chinese businessmen that wanted to trade over in the UK, using some form of security surveillance technology. This is what I'm saying. There is so much in this book of interest. While the royal family still denied my allegations, it also effectively banned the Queen of England's third child from appearing at public events and forbade him from using the honorific His Royal Highness. So dramatic was the fallout that two streaming services, Netflix and Amazon, would soon announce they had projects in the work to dramatise how the interview was arranged and executed, and a third company embarked on a feature-length documentary. As devastating as this interview was for Prince Andrew, for my legal team, it was like an injection of jet fuel. Its contents would not only help us build an ironclad case against the prince, but also open the door to potentially subpoenaing his ex-wife, Sarah Ferguson, and their daughters, Princess Beatrice and Eugenie. Did he really take Beatrice out for pizza on March 10th, 2001, as he claimed? If we deposed the princesses, his family members could potentially poke holes in his alibi. Would his medical records really show that he had a temporary case of anhidrosis, a lack of perspiration, which typically isn't a response to adrenaline? It's also been debunked because we've seen photos of him since then with sweat on his shirt. So we weren't quite ready to sue yet, but this interview gave us a lot more to work with than we'd had before. In early December, BBC Panorama released a documentary called The Prince and the Epstein Scandal, and I was among those interviewed. This would be my first on-camera interview with a British outlet. And while it had been recorded before Prince Andrew's sit-down with the BBC, correspondent Dara McIntyre used my words to contradict what the disgraced royal had told Mateless. Once again, I told the story of the 3 times I was trafficked to Prince Andrew. I was also asked about recent suggestions that the photo of Prince Andrew with his arm around me in 2001 was a fake. Like his arm was elongated or the photo was doctored, I responded. I mean, come on, I'm calling BS on this, because that's what it is. He knows what happened, I know what happened, and there's only one of us telling the truth. And I know that's me. I mean, it is kind of far-fetched To think that someone as powerful as Prince Andrew, someone as much of a bully, according to the testimonies of his ex-staff, would allow someone such as Virginia Roberts Guiffre to get this far in a process of accusing him of something so serious without there being obviously something behind it. You know, just using the smallest bit of common sense in it. I mean, the fact that we have photographic evidence, we have emails, we have court testimony is, you know, a no-brainer, really. But I'm just saying this because there are still people that apparently doubt her word about this. I was glad for the opportunity to reach a British audience. Yeah, because you know what? The British people, for the most part, I would say, were proper rooting for her. She really, to me, her appearances on TV were very powerful, very, what is the word? I don't want to say convincing, but in that area of word. I was glad for the opportunity to reach a British audience, and at one point in the interview, I spoke to them directly. I implore the people in the UK to stand up beside me, to help me fight this fight, to not accept this as being okay, I said, adding, this is not some sordid sex story. This is a story of being trafficked. This is a story of abuse. If only we could keep the pressure on, I thought. Maybe the prince and others could be held to account. Well, very, very slowly, Virginia, this facade that the royal family have portrayed to the British public for so long is slowly being eroded. People are slowly starting to understand, more people are starting to understand, especially the younger generations, that this family are sordid, they are abusive, they are exploitative, they make a hell of a lot of money, they don't pay tax, and we actually support their lifestyle. All the while being deluded that they're somehow morally superior to us, as well as financially, and everything else. But anyway, I'll not get too much into that. In February 2020, I flew from Cairns to Los Angeles to participate in a podcast called Broken. In the podcast's first season, New Yorker writer Ariel Levy and the Miami Herald's Julie K. Brown had taken listeners through the litany of Epstein's crimes. Now, journalist Tara Palmieri was hosting the second season, Broken, Seeking Justice. Palmieri wanted to follow several of Epstein's victims as we sought to reconcile our pasts with our present-day lives. The project was backed by two terrific guys named Adam, the Hollywood director Adam McKay, and the podcaster and former NPR correspondent Adam Davidson. I was impressed by the team's firepower, and I liked that Palmieri didn't give two shakes about Epstein, only about the women he'd hurt. I would be helping to gather reporting during a 10-day cross-country journey with Palmieri. Our goal, to track down some of the people who'd worked for Epstein during the time I knew him. I was hoping that some who'd stayed silent before his death might now be willing to talk. I think I mentioned before that Tara Palmieri has a YouTube channel that you can go and watch. She does quite a lot of content, especially about this subject and Jeffrey Epstein. And obviously having such close and intimate knowledge of it, it's pretty interesting to watch. The first person I wanted to talk with was also named Adam Perry Lang. He'd been Epstein's personal chef from 1999 to 2003. Lang is the one who fed me pizza on Little St. James, and he travelled regularly on Epstein's jets. Brad and I had reached out to him in 2014, but we'd never heard back. Now he lived in Southern California. Palmieri had found a couple of home addresses, and Lang had a steak restaurant in Hollywood called APL for his initials. First, we tried to visit him at home, but Lang didn't seem to be living at the places we went to, so we made a reservation at APL. When we arrived, I told the host Lang was an old friend and that I was hoping to say hello to him. We were seated in a big booth at the back of the dining room and we ordered dinner, but Lang wasn't in the restaurant that night. We left word explaining I was trying to reach him. A few days later, I got a text from him. "Hi, Virginia. I know this has been a traumatic and terrible time for you. I hope your fierce advocacy brings you and the other innocent victims peace and justice. I hope you know by now that I'm planning to speak with your attorney. Best, Adam." I was thrilled. I thought Lang was finally ready to help. But when I followed up, he sent a statement that reiterated what he'd said for years, that while he was in Epstein's employ, he never witnessed any activity or nudity or underage girls or depraved acts or abuse. Shame on him. You may be wondering what it was that I wanted from Lang. Of course, I hoped that he might have information that could help me hold Epstein's co-conspirators accountable. Speaking of which, over the Christmas holidays, there were some documents released from the Epstein files. I think it was kind of a mistake. It's so confusing because when I was reading this book live, I'm sorry for the interruptions, but I think it's really important to bring this context. While I was reading this book live, a law was passed in Congress to release the full Epstein files that the FBI have been or the Department of Justice in America. This is like the top level of the government that Donald Trump had won his campaign on saying he's going to release these files. So nearly a year into his presidency, we have had this law passed on the literal deadline date. A whole bunch of photos got released, some still redacted, some documents with redactions. There was meant to be no redactions. There was no context for any of the information. It was only a tiny, tiny part of what obviously was available to them. And then, because, I mean, the people in power, the politicians who worked so hard to bring this law into place and have seen it been not adhered to, are saying they're now going to take more legal action against the head of the Department of Justice. So then some more documents get released and they're really intense and really insane. And it now appears that there were 10 co-conspirators. So very interesting that she mentions it here. We still have no idea who these people are. We have an idea, but that would just be us speculating. I think it said one was from Ohio, which would be pretty obviously Lex Wexner. Then there was the Boston, which we know that Ghislaine Maxwell lived in Boston, but it could have been someone else. And then there were people in other places in the US. You may be wondering what it was that I wanted from Lang. Of course, I hoped that he might have information that could help me hold Epstein's co-conspirators accountable, but also on a purely emotional level. I just wanted to hear Lang confirm my experience. He could have said something as simple as, "I saw what happened to you because I was there," and that would have helped me heal. Would I have been thrilled if he handed over incontrovertible evidence of wrongdoing? Sure, but I wasn't really expecting that. Mostly what I wanted was validation. Clearly, though, I wasn't going to get that from Lang. We hit another dead end. When we tracked down a woman, a former model, whom I knew had procured girls for Epstein, who was one of several women I'd been forced to sleep with when she was an adult and I was a minor. This woman's connection to Epstein was well known by this point. Her name is in the flight logs of his private jets. This woman now had a different last name and lived in a gated community in the Los Angeles area, which a broken producer deftly entered by following another car through the gate. We parked on the street outside her house, and I went to the door and rang the bell. A moment later, the woman stuck her head out of an upstairs window and yelled at me to get off her property. "It's Virginia Roberts," I yelled back, but she slammed the window. So I buzzed the intercom. Soon, I heard her voice. "I don't want to talk to you," the woman said. "Jeffrey's dead, and you helped kill him." That pissed me off. "I'm not here about what Jeffrey's done," I said. "I'm here about what you've done." "I'm calling security," she said, and soon we were being escorted off the property. See, this part is an equally important part of the overall story of the Epstein scandal, because it really involves so many people. Even just, she said, the chef. The chef's now got some fancy restaurant in LA. This woman lives in a gated community. These people don't want to give up their lifestyles to support what's right in life. That's why it's so important. Having exhausted our leads on the West Coast, Pal Mary, her producer, and I flew to Florida, where we knew two other former Epstein employees lived. The first one we visited was Larry Vysotsky, Epstein's primary pilot. As I've said, Vysotsky had been close to Epstein, and he had never turned over his flight logs to the authorities, so I knew an interview with him was a long shot. The pilot lived in a gated community, and when we drove up, the gate attendant got Vysotsky on the phone and let me talk to him. "Hello, is this Larry?" I stammered. And when I heard him speak, I added, "Oh my goodness," like a voice from the past. I told him I was outside with a reporter. "Can I just come in and have a cup of coffee with you?" I asked. When he hesitated, I suggested lunch. That's when Vysotsky hung up on me. Getting doors slammed in one's face is draining, to say the least. I'd been so fired up, imagining that if I just put myself in front of these people I'd known in 2000, 2001, and 2002, I could persuade them to talk to me. But once again, I'd been naive. I was beginning to feel like a trained monkey, trotting out my story over and over and over, but getting little in return. Pal Mary had questioned me at length about my history with all these people once again. I'd had to relive the dark period when I knew them. But because none were talking to us, I felt as if I'd gotten all spun up for nothing. Each night, back in our hotel, I'd call Robbie, more and more despondent. Robbie got so worried about my spiraling mood that he called Adam Davidson, one of the podcast producers. And the next day, Davidson flew to Florida to try to shore me up. I can imagine that was a very intense phone call, given what we know about her husband's temper. I know this whole process has put a lot of pressure on you, he told me. I can only imagine how hard that is, and I want you to know we're all standing behind you. I appreciated Davidson's support, but still, when Palmieri and I set out to visit the second former Epstein associate who lived in Florida, Juan Alessi, Epstein's one-time house manager, I was nearly out of steam. It was Alessi who had driven me home from El Brillo Way on the night Epstein and Maxwell first abused me, and over the next 2 years, I'd gotten to know him and his wife Maria a bit. Alessi had never talked to the media, and there was little reason to think he would talk to us. When I rang the intercom on his outer gate, I would have bet you $100 that we'd strike out again. But Alessi answered right away. Hi, Juan, I said quickly. It's Virginia. Virginia Roberts from like 20 years ago. I've flown all the way from Australia to try to put together the pieces of my past. I told him. I just wanted to talk face to face. There was a pause, then a buzzing sound. Alessi was letting us in. Remember, when she first went to the house in El Brillo Way, she must have been 16 or 17 tops. That was when this guy first met her. And Epstein and Maxwell were in their 40s, I want to say. Moments later, Alessi opened his front door, his wife, Maria, right beside him, and we all just stared at one another for a second. As two small dogs jumped around at our feet, Alessi invited Palmieri and me to sit down. At first, he didn't want to be recorded, but then he changed his mind. The conversation was disjointed. Alessi, who still spoke in slightly broken English, acknowledged that he'd been driving Maxwell around on that sweltering day when she recruited me at Mar-a-Lago. He said he remembered sweating in the car as he waited for her. He insisted he had no idea of the sexual abuse going on in the house, but admitted he told Epstein at one point, "One of those girls is going to get you in trouble, Jeffrey." He recalled seeing formerly Prince Andrew in Epstein's homes, though he said he'd never seen him do anything wrong. I told Alessi I remembered it was often him who paid me after a massage. I also recalled him seeing me naked. He said he didn't remember any of that. "I swear to God, Virginia, I never saw you naked," he said. "I saw other girls, adult, but not you." I could tell Palmieri was getting frustrated with his denials, and I understood why. Still, I felt better than I had the entire trip. Alessi remembered me. In a sense, that was what I'd come all this way for, to be acknowledged as a person face to face. As we got up to leave, Alessi apologized. "Virginia, I feel so bad what happened to you, but I feel so good that I see you so great now. So good that you make up your life, that you have a family." I felt a wave of emotion then. "This has been a beautiful reunion," I said, and I meant it. "Thanks for opening your doors and your heart to me." Alessi reiterated that he'd never imagined he'd ever see me again. I thought you hate me, he said. Why would she hate you? Pal Mary asked pointedly. I thought, she would have blamed me for not doing something, he said. This definitely doesn't sound like someone who didn't see anything or any abuse. I'll tell you what it does sound like. It sounds like an immigrant in America who's scared of being deported or arrested, because that is the same situation that happened with Michael Jackson and his staff, to the point where they actually were accused and maybe even prosecuted for financial problems. I know one of them definitely left America because of the whole having to testify in court thing. I thought these girls would go against me. Or they would have said, oh, John knew it, but I didn't. Sure, John. We said our goodbyes, and as we walked to the car, Pal Mary was still aggrieved that Alessi hadn't owned up to what he'd witnessed, but I was happy. I don't expect everybody to come forward and say exactly what they saw, because that would incriminate them, I said. But I didn't blame Alessi for protecting himself. I thought he had a good heart. He couldn't do shit about Epstein's behaviour, I concluded. He feels horrible about it. Could he have talked more? Yes, but it's the beginning of a dialogue, so I'll take that as a plus. I'm grateful that he invited me into his home and treated me like a human being. So yeah, it says a lot about the justice system in general, which is that the people committing the crimes, and this isn't just about pedophilia and abuse of women, because there are some other things that have been released in the Epstein files, which is the CP that 2 other girls that she mentioned. I'm not sure if I've read that bit yet already. For years had claimed that Epstein had taken from them photographs and we were distributing them. They've waited all of this time to have that testimony, or the fact that the police failed to act on that information validated because of this partial release of the Epstein files. But yeah, the very people that could assist the police with their inquiries, the witnesses, I don't want to call them co-conspirators, but they were employees. They were part of the group that was allowing the activity to occur, cannot testify. They cannot do anything because of fear of being deported or being incriminated for other crimes, like I said, because sometimes they have financial debts, or they were being paid cash in hand. These are the kind of problems that are really going on. It's so much bigger, and people just want to say, oh, it's just a very small group of people. It's so interconnected and interrelated with every aspect of the society. Something has to change if anyone wants to change anything. And the media is putting pressure on these people to speak, not the police. The police should be, if they really cared, they would be making systems easier for people to give testimony, to have protection from retaliation. I returned to Australia. My non-stop media tour had worn me out, and it would have probably been wise for me to slow down and rest. But after so long, being vilified by the press, I felt I had to take advantage of every opportunity to tell my story, because who knew how much longer I'd be offered the chance. So, in March 2020, when an Italian TV talk show offered to fly my whole family to Rome, I said yes. Right before the COVID-19 pandemic shut down much of the world, Robbie, the kids, and I visited the city of the Seven Hills, as the guidebooks call it, and ticked off every tourist destination. I still have a photo book I made that shows the fun we had on this special Roman holiday. All this came at a cost, however. The price of this lovely getaway for me was that I had to excavate my worst memories one more time on camera. I was noticing that with every interview, my storytelling was becoming a bit less emotional. At times, my voice sounded almost mechanical or even robotic, as if I were reciting something I'd memorized. And yet still, while I increasingly appeared unaffected on the outside, on the inside, every retelling of my stories of abuse hit me hard. Robbie was watching me, and he could see I was coming apart. When someone comes home from fighting a war, they heal, they get therapy, they put distance between what happened to them in combat and their present day lives, he said. But every time you relive what happened to you, it's as if you were still on the battlefield. How are you supposed to get better if you never come home from the war? He was right. I had told myself that in order to fight for justice, I had to keep spreading the word about what Epstein and Maxwell had done. But spreading the word meant reliving my horrors, and that ate away at me. This is the only way I know of to keep the pressure on, I told Robbie cheerfully one night. He knelt down in front of me then, I'll never forget this, and took my hands in his. Remember when I asked you to marry me? How I told you I'd have your back until we die? He asked. Well, this is me having your back. You are running on fumes. Your publicity schedule is affecting your health. It's affecting your family. I understand why you were given all these interviews, I really do. But honey, it's killing you. And it's killing me to watch. My husband saw me clearly than I saw myself. I was burned out. I mean, there's a lot she doesn't tell us about the reality of her relationship with what's his name? Robbie. So yeah, interesting. What I needed, chapter 34, From Bad to Worse. What I needed, my friend said, was some time in the great outdoors. This was a new buddy of mine, the first mom I'd met when we moved to Cairns, and she had a daughter Ellie's age. This friend, her name was Blaze, knew how much I loved animals, and she'd seen the luminescent blue butterfly on my Twitter account, which was also the logo for my foundation. Victims Refuse Silence. Let's take both our families to Butterfly Valley, Blaze said, describing a creekside sanctuary about 2 hours south of our house, where visitors sleep in rustic cabins and kept their eyes peeled for Cairns birdwings, whose 6-inch wingspans make them the largest butterflies in Australia. The trip sounded like a perfect chance to rest and recharge in nature, and Robbie said he and the kids would come too. So off we went. and initially it was heaven. Butterfly Valley lived up to its name. We must have seen thousands of Cairns birdwings in all shapes, sizes, and colours. But when I returned home, I spiked a temperature and my head hurt like hell. When I became delirious, Robbie took me to the doctor, who did some tests and concluded I must have, I thought she was going to say contracted COVID, but no. Been bitten by a mosquito because I had meningitis. I couldn't believe it. During the trip, I'd been the only one in our group slathering myself with bug spray. I was admitted to the hospital, where things got so much worse. Not realizing how delirious I'd become, at one point, I'd got out of bed to go to the toilet and lost my footing. When I fell to the floor, I heard a cracking sound. I'd broken my neck. Now, I'm going to take this part of the book with a very large dose of salt, because I think I mentioned before, Virginia was a victim not only of Epstein and the people in his circle, but of her own husband. But yet she covered for him during the writing of this book, and only after it was finished did she come out and admit publicly to the fact that he'd been abusing her for many years, going back to at least 2015. So yeah, like I said, if you go on her Instagram, or when her Instagram was still public, I'm not sure if it still exists, but there were lots of videos and photos of her in hospital with serious injuries and bruises on her body. She never let on what the causes of those injuries were. So, yeah. I soon recovered from the meningitis, but now doctors said I needed surgery to repair my neck, which hurt constantly. They weren't quite ready to operate, however, so we waited. To cheer me up, Robbie got me a French bulldog that I named Juno, and once I was up and walking around again, I took Juno everywhere. But in April, I was back in the hospital again with pneumonia. It was as if one mosquito bite had let loose a waterfall of health problems. I wasn't the only one struggling, of course. In spring 2020, the world was shutting down as the coronavirus raged. But still, surreally, my face and my story seemed to be everywhere as the interviews I'd given over the previous months began to air. Even as I nursed my neck injury in May 2020, Netflix launched its 4-part series, Jeffrey Epstein, Filthy Rich, which filthy is literally the word. Literally the word. Which told the saga of Epstein and Maxwell's reign of terror. In the final episode, a healthy-looking me reiterated that Epstein had not acted alone, and repeated my belief that all his co-conspirators needed to be held accountable. The monsters are still out there abusing other people, I said. Why they have not been named and shamed yet is beyond me. Well, this is the hardest bit of her story to digest. The word I was thinking of earlier when I was trying to remember how I found her interviews and her on-screen testimonies, compelling. She is very compelling in the way she delivers her retelling of these events, not least because she's consistent every single time the story stays the same. Right after Epstein's death, Maxwell had disappeared. Unconfirmed reports placed her in California, Massachusetts, France, and Israel. But all anyone knew for sure was that she was in hiding. Even her own lawyers said they did not know her location, and they refused to accept service on her behalf of 3 lawsuits filed by Annie Farmer. That's who I was trying to remember, who said they had the CP. It was Annie Farmer and her sister. Jennifer Arias and a third survivor sister identified only as Jane Doe. That meant that even as federal prosecutors assembled a case against Maxwell, she couldn't be arrested until someone actually found her. Finally, investigators used a tracker on one of her mobile phones to zero in on a remote 156-acre property in Bradford, New Hampshire. Oh, it was in New Hampshire. Why did I think it was in Boston? So it must have been someone else then in Boston. On July 2nd, 2020, the FBI broke through her locked gate and announced themselves at her front door, telling her to open it. Instead, she fled to another room, so they broke in. She was arrested and charged with 6 counts that included transportation of a minor with intent to engage in criminal sexual activity and perjury. Perjury. The perjury charges were personally satisfying for me because I'd enabled it. The government was alleging Maxwell had lied under oath in her depositions we'd taken in my defamation case against her. The other charges alleged that from 1994 to 1997, Maxwell helped Epstein recruit, groom, and abuse girls as young as 14 years old. These initial charges mentioned 3 unidentified minor victims, although I was not among them. Because of the pandemic, Judge Alison J. Nathan held a virtual bail hearing for Maxwell in July 2020, with all the participants appearing remotely. 2 victims spoke. Annie Farmer called Maxwell a sexual predator who groomed and abused me and countless other children and young women. And a prosecutor read aloud a statement from the other victim, referred to as Jane Doe. Without Ghislaine, this woman said, Jeffrey could not have done what he did. Prosecutors had made clear that Maxwell knew how to evade detection. While still in hiding, she had changed her email address and registered a new phone number under the name GMAX, which wasn't a very good name because we already know that that's what she made everyone call her. I mean, it wasn't a very covert name. She also held passports from France and Britain and had bank accounts that totaled as much as $20 million. That's a lot of money for someone supposedly who didn't have a job. So she would have a relatively easy time fleeing if she wished to. Judge Nathan denied Maxwell bail. The day after Maxwell's bail hearing, I was interviewed on CBS This Morning by Gayle King. I said that Maxwell could smell the vulnerability of the young girls she recruited, and I asserted that the way Maxwell used her femininity to give girls a false sense of safety made her worse than Epstein. While Epstein was a sick pedophile, Maxwell was vicious. She was evil, I said. Put it this way, Epstein was Pinocchio and she was Geppetto. She was, King interjected, pulling the strings? Yes, I answered. She was pulling the strings. King asked, what would justice look like for you? I would like to see Ghislaine stay in jail forever, I said. I would like her to apologise for what she's done to me and so many others. Does the buck stop with Ghislaine Maxwell, in your opinion? She asked. No. The buck stops with every single monster. Sorry. No, the backstop. I'm ruining this bit. No, the buck stops when every single monster gets held accountable and our children are safe, I said. Not just my monsters, but all the monsters, and we need everyone's help. Two weeks later, Judge Loretta Preska, who was presiding over ongoing decisions related to my defamation suit against Maxwell, gave us a little help when she made public a second batch of documents from my case. This batch included flight logs from Epstein's private jets, police reports from the 2005 to 2008 investigation of Epstein in Florida, a set of emails dated January 2015 between Epstein and Maxwell, and emails from me to the FBI in 2014, including one in which I expressed interest in pursuing a case against Epstein and proving, as I put it, how much pedophilia occurred. The email was just another reminder of how much time had passed while I and other survivors' sisters begged law enforcement to bring these people to justice. I think that part gets overlooked a lot because, as I'm sure I've mentioned previously, when Virginia was initially contacted by authorities, she didn't really want to get involved. She had built a new life in Australia. She had moved on. She had not really had anything to do with them for all of that time, until I think they contacted her and said something like, "Have you spoken to them?" And she was like, "No." She was kind of forced into this situation, and the same thing with going public with her story. She testified as a Jane Doe, and her identity was made public, well, was found out, uncovered, shall we say, by someone, by a journalist at the Mail, the Daily Mail, the Daily Fail. They convinced her, they flew over to Australia and convinced her to go public with this story. Naming formally Prince Andrew, but not actually naming formally Prince Andrew, if you know what I mean. I.e., she became a scapegoat in this situation. And the reason why they were able to go after Epstein was because of how the authorities pretty much let him off in 2008. So anyone who questions her motives should really check themselves in, if you ask me. Right, check themselves in. Does that even make sense? Check themselves. Have a word with themselves. Just think about it. Think about everything she's said, everything that has been quantified, everything that corroborates what she's said, and then have a word with yourself if you still think she's in the wrong for doing what she did. I mean, I'm talking about going public with all of this and taking legal action. In August 2020, I had what's called an anterior cervical discectomy. Doctors at Sunnybank Private Hospital in Brisbane went in through the front of my throat and removed a shattered disc, then attached metal swivels in my neck to allow me to continue to have some mobility. As I healed, I posted about the ordeal on Instagram, showing my post-surgery bruises and thanking my supporters for helping me to get through it. This is what I'm talking about. You can see these videos, and she's clearly very pilled up, is what I want to say, because, you know, I mean, they're going to give you medication for that amount of that level of surgery, but her speech is not very it's not very coherent. And on top of it, there are trolls in her comments, which I noticed. Well, we know that the law firm that formerly Prince Andrew engaged to defend him uses online troll farms. Andrew Brettler, his name is. I'm too tough for something like this to take me down, and I got a bionic spine out of it, I wrote. I was not permitted to fly afterward, so when I was released from the hospital, Robbie and I drove 6 hours back to Cairns. But as my body mended, everything hurt. I was taking strong painkillers, but trying not to rely on them too much. Knowing how drugs had helped me escape from reality in the past, I worried about their allure. My determination to resist that temptation, however, would soon waver. In September, the Broken podcast that I'd helped report went live, but I didn't listen to it. I was too zoned out on oxycodone. Bear in mind as well, she was introduced to these kind of drugs as a teenager. So that's a long habit to break, especially when, for that kind of surgery, you're going to be given something. It's sad. It's really, really sad. I grew up a tomboy, climbing trees, making mud pies and splashing in ponds. So I know what happens when you turn over rocks that haven't been disturbed in a long time. When daylight hits, the creepy, crawly things, it makes them squirm. When the deposition in which I made the late MIT scientist, Marvin Minsky, now I know for sure he's in the released emails. Among my abusers became public, for example, a colleague of Minsky's blasted out an email to a mailing list for MIT's Computer Science and Artificial Intelligence Laboratory. In the email, renowned computer scientist Richard Stallman suggested that I had been a willing participant in my encounter with Minsky. Stallman questioned whether Minsky applied force or violence and seemed to be arguing that if he did not, I must have opted in. The most plausible scenario is that she presented herself to him as entirely willing, Stallman wrote of me. Stallman was criticised by some who received this email, but still it was clear that not everyone agreed that the girls and women whom Epstein and Maxwell trafficked to others were victims who deserved compassion. They took the money, didn't they? Was the most common refrain from people in this camp. As if someone can't be victimised while being paid $200. What about the men that felt it necessary to pay a teenager $200 to get a quick fix of whatever gratification they needed at that time? What about them, huh? What about having a look at their social media? While I wasn't pen pals with people who believed these things, their opinions reached me through social media. Occasionally through email. My point? Stallman wasn't alone in his skepticism. Just as Stallman defended Minsky, many friends and colleagues of MIT Media Lab director Joichi Ito defended him after it was revealed that he had cultivated a close and lucrative relationship with Epstein. Ito apologized, and for a little while it appeared he'd kept his job. Then, the New Yorker revealed just how extensively Ito had worked to cover up Epstein's visits to the MIT campus, as well as Epstein's direct donations and donations that Epstein had helped prompt from other people. One day after that article ran, Ito resigned. You see, it's not even the fact of them infiltrating the universities with their donations, saying, oh, I can get you a lovely little teenager, that will do favors for you for $200. It's not just that, it's the fact that these people were teaching artificial intelligence courses, lecturing. This wonderful product, generative AI, that said no one ever leading into 2026. The chips were beginning to fall for other men who'd been connected to Epstein too. A month after Ito's downfall, Brown University, who'd hired an MIT fundraising official who'd worked with Ito to cultivate Epstein. Do you see how it works? Do you see how he's flying around, mingling with the rich people, saying, I know what can make you money. I can show you an investment that can make you money. It's called artificial intelligence. It's called the tech industry. At their little conferences. Where was I? Put that official on leave to make sure his behaviour could be reconciled with Brown's core values. I wonder what their core values are. Harvard University, which had received over $9 million in gifts from Epstein, would soon shut down its program for evolutionary dynamics after investigating the link between its director, Martin Nowak, and Epstein. The ripples of Epstein's public shunning were soon being felt outside academia as well. Leon Black would resign as chief executive of Apollo Global Management, and Jess Staley would resign as CEO of Barclays Bank. There's this word that keeps coming into my head is money laundering. Two words, I should say. Money laundering. Both after inquiries into the two men's relationships with Epstein's. And it wouldn't be long before Melinda French Gates would tell CBS's Gayle King that while there were a number of factors that led her to divorce her husband of 27 years, Bill Gates, there's a few photos of him with young girls that I've seen recently as well. His work with Epstein was definitely one of them. I did not like that he had meetings with Jeffrey Epstein, no. I made that clear to him, Melinda would tell King. I bet it wasn't just Epstein she had a problem with. Adding that she herself met with Epstein exactly one time because she wanted to see who this man was. Her reaction: I regretted it the second I walked in the door. He was abhorrent. He was evil personified. My heart breaks for these women. Well, I mean, at least she said that. But the thing that gets me is, if she can see it, why can't all the other people that are now claiming to be innocent parties, who were pictured with him on definitely more than one occasion? Definitely. If only everyone felt such empathy for Epstein's victims. It's true. It's true. It is possible to say, you know what? It's never too late to own up to your mistakes, to own up where you went wrong and say, yeah, I can still make a go of it. I can still make my life successful and joyful, but I can speak about this stuff. I can really do something for good. If only everyone felt such empathy for Epstein's victims. In December 2020, The Telegraph ran a story. The Telegraph, I'm not a fan. I'm not a fan of any newspaper, but the Miami Herald, they get a pass. The Telegraph ran a story about me that was headlined, Prince Andrew's accuser was a P word. The Telegraph, you know. The Telegraph, in case you are not from the UK, thinks it's a very highbrow newspaper for intelligent people, for the intelligent, well-heeled reader. Calling her a P word. By P word, I mean sex worker. I just don't want to say that word because it's degrading, especially knowing how these situations came to be. They came to be because Ghislaine Maxwell was driven around the streets of areas where she knew, like outside schools, where she knew young girls that were vulnerable, that would be easily talked into getting into the car and coming to their mansion to make a quick buck to do a massage. Before you know it, they're stealing their photos and distributing them to their friends. They're offering their bodies out to their friends or college professors or ex-ministers of governments of countries that we're not even supposed to be communicating with. But you want to call them a P word. Based on a recorded conversation between a New York publisher and the tabloid journalist Sharon Churcher, who was trying to sell a book, those court papers implied that I was making up allegations as a form of blackmail, only seeking to get paid off. In my darkest hours, especially when the pain in my neck immobilized me, reading headlines like these cut me to the quick. The fact that I suspected that this was my critic's intent, call her a whore, that'll shut her up, didn't make it any easier to read. 10 days before Christmas 2020, when I was really struggling, I recorded a video of myself that I shared on Twitter. I'm not asking for a pity party, I told my followers, who numbered more than 100,000. I don't want that. I just want to know I'm on the right path and helping people. Some days it's just, at that point, my voice cracked and tears filled my eyes. I'd spent so long believing that it was my responsibility to demand accountability from those who'd hurt me. But to the extent that that meant repeating what happened to me again and again and again, as if on a tape loop, I wasn't sure how much more of that I could take. It's hard, I said to the camera. I just feel quite alone. Still, there were other less lonely times that I sensed I was part of a movement that was forcing positive change. On January 14th, 2021, L Brand's shareholders filed a complaint alleging that Leslie Wexner, among others, Leslie Wexner 100% has to be a co-conspirator with Jeffrey Epstein in this whole setup. Created an entrenched culture of misogyny, bullying, and harassment at the company. They also said Wexner, who had stepped down as CEO the previous year to return to his mansion in New Albany, Ohio, had breached his fiduciary duty because he was aware of abuses being committed by Epstein. Among other things, Epstein was alleged to have preyed on Victoria's Secret's models, and shareholders claimed this abuse caused a devaluation of the brand under the company's umbrella. 6 months later, in July, the company settled, pledging to invest $90 million to clean up its act, improving sexual harassment and anti-retaliation practices, and ceasing to enforce non-disclosure agreements that had silenced women victims in the past. Not even a year later, a singer and former American Idol contestant named Jax released an ode to body positivity that quickly climbed the pop charts. I know Victoria's Secret, she sang. And girl, you wouldn't believe it. She's an old man who lives in Ohio, making money off girls like me, cashing in on body issues, selling skin and bones with big boobs. I know Victoria's Secret. She was made up by a dude. Victoria's Secret new female CEO soon wrote Jax a letter, thanking her for raising important issues. One by one, some in Epstein's inner circle were being called out. If I had played even a small part in that, I thought, maybe I could keep going. I think I had talked about Victoria's Secret in one of my previous readings, because to anyone who doesn't know, I used to work in the fashion and beauty industry, and I knew some girls that were in that show, and like I had said then, it was a really big deal. Getting that show was a really big deal for a model because it was a good job. Because it goes on for like a week or something. Like it's not just a one day. But I was quite shocked when I heard that some of the younger girls, and remember, like these girls that start modeling can be, especially in the US, can be 14 or 15. Many of them coming from Eastern Europe. And they would keep them in this hotel, like a whole floor of a hotel would be booked out. And they weren't allowed to leave the hotel for the whole duration of that show being produced. you can only imagine what could have happened to any of those girls, and there would be very little that would be done about it. Because if they go to their agent is not going to want to speak out against Victoria's Secret, which is literally one of the best jobs they can get for the girls that are on their agency. Do you see how it works? So anyway, I'm going to leave it there for tonight because there's still another couple of chapters. So I'm going to do another reading maybe tomorrow, or I might do a live tomorrow. I'll see how I feel. But anyway, I hope that was appreciated by all the people that have listened to all my previous readings, and we will soon get to the end of the book. And next time I will try and stick more to the reading of the book. I just felt like there's a lot more information coming out, and I feel like it's very relevant as we read the book together, and that's why I speak on it. So you can always go out and buy the book and read it for yourself. You don't have to watch, but I know some people do appreciate it. That is all I've got for tonight. I will see you very soon. Have a lovely rest of the Boxing Day evening. See ya.